By now, most of you probably know that the patch 9 beta was released, and I downloaded it yesterday, and I played a couple games for the first time, and there's some really good things about it. Now, I know that Zaript, and Heir of Carthage, and Prussian Prince, and some other commentators have already gone really in-depth with patch 9. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to bore you guys with that because you guys already know what patch 9 is about if you watch any other YouTube commentators. But I do kind of want to give some thoughts about it, what I think about the patch so far from the couple games that I've played. Anytime that a patch comes out that changes the metagame up from maybe something that has gotten stale, I think it's a very good thing. I think the metagame for sure in Rome 2 had gotten pretty stale. And the reason for that was that cataphracts and elephants and chariots were simply way too overpowered. In tandem, factions like Bactria that could field armored war elephants and cataphracts, they were just very, very hard to deal with. You really couldn't beat them in a straight up melee engagement or any kind of engagement really. So I'm really glad about some of these price changes. I think they were really, really good. Some of you might not know that a hotfix was released after patch 9's release. And that hotfix actually increased the prices of elephants and chariots even more. I believe chariots are now, I'm going to get the number maybe a little bit wrong, but it's like 1380 to bring a size chariot now. And it's around 1400 or 1500 for an Indian armored war elephant. So those are really good nerfs. I think it's fine to keep their killing power the way it is, even though I do believe their mass was reduced a little bit, so they aren't quite as deadly on the charge. But their killing power, I think, is fine. But increasing that cost, I think, is a very, very good step. Because, like I said, the cataphract metagame was just ridiculous. Like, cataphracts were too strong, Indian war elephants were too strong, chariots were too strong. So a lot of those really high-tier units got massive price increases, which in some ways is really good, and in some ways it's actually kind of bad. Now, the reason it's good is because, again, those overpowered units, they're not going to be quite as easy to field large armies of them anymore. You can't bring a balanced army if you're going to bring a lot of elephants or bring a lot of cataphracts, which I think is a good change. But it also hurts some factions. Specifically, I think the Suebi come to mind. I don't think they did a great job across the board of increasing the prices of units. And what I mean by that is, I think Rome, for instance, has gotten a massive, massive buff because they have a ridiculous amount of sword units to choose from, and they have a bunch of lower and mid-tier swords that are actually really, really strong. If you think about armored legionnaires, legionary cohorts, those kind of guys that are kind of more on the mid-tier side of things, they are only maybe from 700 to 900 talents now, whereas the ridiculous units like the Praetorian Guard got all the way up to like 1300 talents. But the problem is that because they have all access to that many swords, they can still bring really strong heavy infantry corps and kind of spam heavy infantry, which most factions can't do now. So Rome got a massive, massive buff in patch 9. Other factions like Egypt, for example, they don't really have mid-tier swords except maybe the Thorax Swordsman. I wouldn't really classify that as a very good sword. Certainly not as good as like legionary cohorts, for example. And like Suebi, like their swordmasters are at 1300, which maybe is fine to keep them at a very high level, but they don't have mid-tier swords. You can't really classify berserkers because they're capped. I think Suebi actually got hurt really, really bad in patch 9 because they have really crappy cavalry except for their high-tier stuff, which costs a ridiculous amount. So the factions that really got hurt were the ones that focused on having high-tier units, and that was really all they had, because they either have units on both sides of the spectrum. They have really high-tier swords and really crap units that can't do anything. So Suebi, for instance, they don't have very good skirmishers. They don't have any mid-tier swords or infantry to speak of. It's either real crap club units or really good swords. And so it hurts them because they can only field the really expensive stuff and can't really bring a very balanced army. Another example, I think, of the price changes being kind of ridiculous is the fact that, and I know I was talking about Rome, but Rome can now field maybe 2 armored legionnaires or legionary cohorts at about the same cost that Egypt can bring 1 royal peltast, or any faction can bring 1 royal peltast. Now that's a balance issue. Now it's nowhere near as broken as something like an elephant or chariot that can kill 200 to 300 units, but in terms of prices across the board, it doesn't make very much sense. because the killing power of 2 veteran legionnaires or legionary cohorts is always going to be a hell of a lot better than 1 royal peltast. So some of those price changes definitely need to get reworked. I don't think that they thought too hard about some of the price changes. Overall, though, I think most of what I've seen in patch 9 is a big step forward for the game, and I'm pretty happy with what they've chosen to do so far. Now, there are still glitches that need to get ironed out. Like, you can sometimes see your enemy's deployment zone in patch 9, which is weird. Like, you can see them deploy their army. That needs to get fixed. Hopefully that gets fixed before the patch actually drops, because that's kind of ridiculous. But replays are also fixed, and I say that with quotations for now. Some people have been reporting that they're not actually fixed, but the hotfix said that a issue with multiplayer desyncs was multiplayer battle replay desyncs was addressed. So fingers crossed. That's why I'm back on Rome 2 right now commentating a replay. Hopefully they actually function properly. Knock on wood, fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Talking about army compositions under patch 9, I think one of the best changes about it was those price changes in some ways, because it forces you to bring more varied and balanced army setups, which I think is always a good thing. When it forces you to bring mid and low tier units, it makes for better gameplay diversity, it makes it more interesting, and it makes for more interesting battles just in general. So when you have the expensive Praetorian Guard, they're like 1,300, they're maybe not worth bringing anymore. So it makes you want to bring more skirmishers, more lower and mid-tier cav, more lower and mid-tier swords and spear units. So looking at this army composition, it's going to be relatively different from what you're used to seeing before patch 9. It's going to be 2 auxiliary cav on my left flank, and then a couple legionary cav as well, a couple gladiator spearmen, some triarii, 3 Balearic slingers, and 3 velites, and then some armor legionnaires, and a legionary cohort thrown in there with a legatus. This was a 2v2 that I played with Sunjetsu the other day. Actually, yesterday, I believe. Yeah, yesterday was the first time I downloaded the patch, so this was actually, I think, my first game on the patch. This was basically 2 separate 1v1s, so I'm not going to worry about the Seleucids or Egyptians too much. But looking at my enemy, the Carthaginian army, he had some Carthaginian hoplites up front, some Libyan infantry, mercenary Iberian swordsmen, which I think are very cool, and you guys have gotten to see plenty of Iberians in my head-to-head campaign recently. And then the African war elephants, some mercenary Iberian cav, and some noble cavalry. Now, I definitely think Rome has the advantage in this matchup. They almost always have. But one thing about my army setup that is very, very important is the velites that I brought. Now, you want to kill elephants very quickly still. They're still a very powerful unit. They were not nerfed very hard. The only nerf that they actually received was their cost. So they're still very powerful. If they get into your swords, they're going to wreak a lot of havoc. So having dedicated javelins, I found, is absolutely 100% the best way to counter elephant units in this game. They have high armor piercing and high missile damage, which means that if you get fast reload on them and get 2 or 3 focusing down an elephant, it's going to die very, very quickly. And you'll actually see that in a couple of replays that I post here soon. I always bring javelins when I know that I'm playing a faction against a faction that can bring elephants, because, one, I think javelins are actually really strong in the metagame at the moment anyway, because they're the most effective skirmish unit in terms of killing power. But then they're also really good because they can focus down heavily armored units like war elephants. So going forward here, going to start the skirmish phase up a little bit. Should be a relatively even skirmish fight, to be honest. He does have 3 mercenary Cretan archers, but it's going to be more about how I can actually effectively use my skirmishers. So going to use quick reload on all of them and focus down 1 Cretan archer, and that's something that he's failing to do. He actually hasn't even brought this mercenary Cretan archer over yet. So just focusing down this mercenary Cretan archer, and that should make it very easy for me to take them off the field and take their killing power away very quickly. I'm going to flank my legionary cav in here, and this is something that I always try to do in a skirmish fight, if I can, is use some cavalry to just bait out my opponent, make him get kind of out of formation, and to force some of his spears to get out in front, or make him run his archers away, which gives me more time to fire into his ranks. So working out pretty well so far. I've taken 1 down to about a 4th strength, so their killing power is basically nothing at this point. And I'm still running my cav around, just trying to see if I can make him run away or turn his backs to my slingers. in a straight-on melee engagement, I feel like I would win a fight here, but I have really powerful skirmishing component as well, and that's something that you really need to focus on when you play any Total War game, is that you have to push your advantage to its fullest potential. There's way too many times, and I might show the replay if Desert Fox allows me to. I'm gonna ask him if he wants me to show it or not. But is that people like will use their, like for instance in the Desert Fox replay, what happened was my opponent, who's a good friend of mine, he brought 5 archer units, and they're each 500 talents worth. So it's like it's 2,500 talents worth of archer units. And I had a rush army, and I just ran at him, and he took the infantry engagement, which he shouldn't have done. He has $2,500 invested in archer units. You have to use those to your fullest potential. If you have a bunch of money invested in cavalry units, use those to their fullest potential. Don't just run them into spear units. Don't take a cav fight that maybe isn't in your favor. You have to make sure that when you spend a lot of money on a certain kind of unit, you use it to its fullest potential. So I have a lot of skirmish units. I have 6 of them. I have no reason to engage my opponent yet. Even if I thought I had an infantry advantage, there's no point. If I outrange my opponent, use them to their fullest potential, get as many kills with them as you can until the battle shifts in your opponent's favor, and that's when you can change things up. So lots of baiting with our cav here. He definitely wanted a cav fight. I don't think he can win a cav fight. Noble cavalry are bad. Why Carthaginian cav is bad in this game, I have no idea. Historically, I believe they're pretty strong. Certainly better than Roman cavalry. But regardless, they're very, very bad, even though they're considered elite tier shot cavalry. Very heavy shot cav. They're absolutely not. Noble cav are very, very bad. And shot cav definitely has gotten some nerfs in the patch. They just seem weaker in general. Now, cataphracts don't seem much weaker, but some of the other shot cav, the Hippeus Lancers, the Noble Cavalry, some of the others, they do definitely seem much weaker. So I'm not sure what that is. They might have nerfed the weight of the charge, but they definitely seem to get less kills off the charge. So I'm not exactly sure what that's about, but regardless, I do think that Roman cav can deal with Carthaginian cav no problem, but I still don't want to take that cavalry fight yet because I'm still shooting into my opponent. Now, they do have these hoplites do have their hoplines facing towards my slinger units, so not going to kill a ton of them in these volleys, but I am just kind of whittling them down a little bit by bit. I do have 22 kills on them so far, and then pretty soon here I believe I'm going to bring up my velites as well to get some real javelin throws in there. And carefully I am screening the advance with the Triarii and the Gladiator Spearmen, so my opponent cannot send his cav up the middle to hurt them, because I would be able to lose these guys very easily if I didn't have spear support. So let's see what these guys are able to do. Even though, again, hoplites are heavily armored and with 70 armor, and they do have the hoplon, from the front I'm still going to be able to tear them up with javelin just because of that armor piercing. And the cav fight has started now. Looks like I failed there on the auxiliary cav, so he did get a charge off there. That was bad, but I am protecting much of my cav with Gladiator Spearmen. So this fight's going to kind of be a wash. I do have my general there, and I'll pop all his abilities pretty soon here, I believe. But the main engagement is starting now, and my Triarii are engaging his hoplites on the right flank. It's going to be a relatively even fight, but I think the Triarii might come out a little bit ahead there. Certainly they're going to be able to hold their own for a while. And then my armored legions are going into the middle of the fight, and that's where this battle will basically be decided, is with my armored legionnaires, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're playing with Rome, you expect your armored legions to be able to hold their own in melee, if not utterly crush your opponent. So that's what's going to happen here. Going to send them into melee against Carthaginian hoplites. That should not be a particularly difficult fight for them, honestly. And as you can see there in the background, the African war elephants are getting committed into the melee fight. And this is when I decided, alright, well, I have my armored legions in there. I have some of my cav. I got to pull them out. But I got to protect my velites, because these are the key to killing those elephants. They're into my swords, not a very good sign, but I can still kill those elephants if I can protect my velites properly. So, might commit my general here to hold down those mercenary Iberian swordsmen. Don't quite remember, but it seemed like he forgot that his Iberian swordsmen were here for a second, just missed microed, and that gives me time to reform. And because they have very, very low armor, I'm going to turn my velites on them in a second. And I believe they are going to get absolutely shredded by a couple of volleys here. Yep, the javelin volleys are going to start coming in now. and most of those were rear volleys. They only have 15 armor. That's the problem with many Iberian troops, very, very low armor. So they just got absolutely decimated there. They're going to be routing off the field, which means I now have a perfect opportunity to shoot in on the African war elephants. The problem is that a Azat Knight sent from the Seleucids got over here into my range units, and I'm going to have to pull back this Armor Legionnaire to protect them. If I don't, and don't tie down these Azat Knights, they're going to be able to wreak havoc on all of my Velites. So that's going to be a problem. But I do have my Armor Legions coming, so hopefully they'll be able to get there in time. And now is when I'm going to start targeting these African war elephants. And you'll see how quickly they drop. They were in a melee fight, but now I have all my range units starting to focus them down in a second here. I do believe I focused them down pretty soon. Yeah, I just clicked an attack order here. So these slingers that I have left and the rest of my Velites are going to come in here, and they're at 20 men left in the unit right now. But with this volley, I believe I'm going to start doing a lot of damage. Killed 2 elephants right there in that volley, and they're just going to start dropping like flies. So you can see that happen a lot with elephants. They tank for a long time, they survive in the fight, do a lot of damage, but as soon as their HP drops to 0, they all start dropping in a couple of seconds, and the unit's gone now, so it's running amok. Only 1 elephant left, and then I'll go off the field pretty soon, and at that point, I have won the battle. So, important things to note from that, or from patch 9 in general. I think Rome is too strong. They've been really strong pretty much since the game came out. Although I honestly think the earlier patches were the ones where Rome was maybe the weakest in terms of how good they've been. But every subsequent patch seems to make them a little bit better. And although their truly elite swords were nerfed in terms of a cost increase, they still have so many other sword units that don't cost a ridiculous amount of money that you can bring. So I don't know. The fact that you can bring 2 Legionnaire units for 1 Royal Peltast, not a good thing. Doesn't make much sense to me. But maybe that'll get fixed before the patch actually releases. The Velites, very big for me. Maybe not a ridiculous amount of kills, but remember how much damage they do to units, even when they don't kill. They reduce their HP by a lot, they reduce their armor, and it makes it a lot easier for your swords to kill the units as well. So, very good unit. They did a lot of work for me there, especially killing the elephants is the biggest thing. You have to have dedicated javelins or some kind of skirmish component to kill elephants, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time killing them. It's just the way it is. Skirmish builds do seem stronger in patch 9. I've seen a lot of people experimenting with them. They seem pretty strong, and I think that's just kind of a symptom of the fact that you can no longer bring a ridiculous amount of high-powered troops. You can't spam Oathsworn anymore. You can't spam Praetorian Guard anymore. Rushes maybe aren't as effective because a lot of those swords cost so much. So you're seeing more interesting builds, and I think that's always a good thing for the game. Looking at stats, 1,700 kills for me, 1,000 or 1,100 for Sunjetsu. Overall, relatively interesting battle, I think. And I will try to get you some more replays soon. Hopefully they keep working for me. At the moment, they've all seemed good. Hopefully that stays the case. Hope you guys enjoyed, and more content coming your way soon. We'll talk to you later. Indie Pride signing out.